My sister's boyfriend mocked me at dinner asking if I was still unemployed. Everyone at the table laughed. My dad even told me to stop making the family look bad, so I let them talk. I sat there silently while they bragged about their money and their status. I waited until he mentioned his job and the investor he was desperate to impress. That was when I pulled out my phone and their faces turned pale. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. I am Audrey, 33 years old, and for the last 2 years, my family has treated me like a cautionary tale. To them, I am the unemployed daughter who failed to launch. They see my simple hooded sweatshirts and my 10-year-old sedan and assume I am struggling to pay rent. What they do not know is that my silence is not failure. It is strategy. I am the secret founder of a venture capital firm that manages a portfolio worth hundreds of millions, but tonight I was just the scapegoat. I arrived at the Needle 5 minutes late. It is one of Seattle's most exclusive seafood restaurants, where the valets drive cars worth more than most houses. The Seattle drizzle had frizzed my hair, and my canvas sneakers were damp. My sister Brittany and her fiancé Jamal were standing under the heated awning. Jamal is the CEO of BioHealth Solutions, a startup that burns cash faster than it makes products. He was wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders and a watch that was too big for his wrist. When he saw me approaching, he did not smile. He did not wave. He simply wound up his arm and tossed a heavy metallic object straight at my chest. I instinctively caught it. I looked down and saw a set of keys with a Porsche logo. I looked up at him confused, thinking he wanted me to admire them. Jamal smirked and checked his watch, saying, "Hey valet, make sure you park this in the VIP spot up front. I do not want any scratches on it." I stood there freezing as the cold rain hit my back. My sister Brittany covered her mouth to hide a giggle. She did not correct him. She did not say, "That is my sister." She just laughed. I placed the keys firmly on the valet podium next to us and said, "Jamal, stop playing games. I am not the valet. I am your future sister-in-law." I thought he would apologize. I thought he would say it was a bad joke. Instead, he stepped closer, invading my personal space. He looked me up and down with genuine disgust in his eyes. He said, "Well, with that outfit, you certainly look like the help. Besides, my car is worth $120,000, which is significantly more than your entire existence, so go park it before I get annoyed." My face burned not with shame but with suppressed rage. Brittany finally spoke up, but not to defend me. She grabbed Jamal's arm and said, "Baby, leave her alone. She probably does not even know how to drive a high-performance car. Let us just go inside." She looked at me with pity, mixed with embarrassment, and whispered, "Just find a parking spot for your rust bucket somewhere far away. Okay? We do not want it ruining the aesthetic of our engagement photos." I watched them walk through the revolving glass doors. Jamal laughed loudly at his own wit. He had no idea that the woman he just treated like a servant was the very investor he had been trying to email for months. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my assistant saying, "Get me the full financial audit on BioHealth Solutions by morning." Then I took a deep breath, smoothed my hoodie, and followed them inside. The game had just begun. The hostess led us to a semi-private alcove with a panoramic view of the Space Needle glowing against the night sky. It was the kind of table reserved for politicians and tech moguls. My father, Richard, immediately took the seat at the head of the table, puffing out his chest, as if he had built the restaurant himself. My mother, Susan, and Brittany flanked him, leaving 2 seats on the other side. As I moved to sit next to my sister, my father cleared his throat loudly. "Not there, Audrey," he said, pointing a manicured finger toward a small gap near the service station. "That view is for people who actually contribute to the conversation. You sit there." He gestured to a chair positioned directly in the path of the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a server rushed out with a tray of oysters, the heavy wooden door would brush against the back of my chair, forcing me to lean forward. It was a calculated power move designed to make me feel small and physically out of place. I sat down without complaint, adjusting my hoodie while my family settled into their plush velvet seats. When the sommelier arrived with the leather-bound wine lists, I naturally reached for one. I had developed a refined palate for vintage reds over the last few years, often buying bottles at auction that cost more than my father's car. But before I could even open the cover, my mother reached across the table with the speed of a viper and snatched the menu from my hands. Her rings clicked against the table, attracting the attention of neighboring diners. "Honestly, Audrey, do not embarrass us," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "We are drinking the 98 Cabernet tonight. A single glass costs $200. That is more than your entire monthly grocery budget. It is wasteful to pour that kind of quality for someone who cannot appreciate the complexity of success. You will have tap water." She handed the menu back to the sommelier with a tight, apologetic smile, saying, "My daughter is driving a very old car, so she will stick to water. No ice." I looked at the sommelier, who seemed uncomfortable, but I just gave him a small nod. "I will have water." "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. Under the table, I touched the phone in my pocket. My thumb traced the cracked screen. My mother had no idea that I actually owned a majority stake in the vineyard that produced the very wine she was ordering. I could have bought the entire cellar, but tonight, I let her enjoy her petty victory. Jamal leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms wide, taking up as much space as possible. He looked at me with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Do not worry about the bill, Audrey," he said loud enough for the table next to us to hear. "I know things are tight for you. It must be hard watching your little sister marry a CEO while you are still figuring things out." He snapped his fingers at the waiter. "Bring us the seafood tower, the large one. And for the lady in the hoodie, just bring a side salad. Actually make it the house salad without the avocado. We do not want her getting used to a lifestyle she cannot maintain." He laughed, and my parents joined in, chuckling as if he had told the funniest joke in the world. My father clapped Jamal on the shoulder, beaming with pride. "This is why we love you, son," my father said. "You know the value of $1, and you know who deserves it." I picked up my glass of lukewarm tap water and took a sip. I watched them high-five over the appetizer menu, oblivious to the fact that their financial savior was drowning in debt, and the woman eating the side salad was about to pull the plug. By the time the appetizers arrived, Jamal was in full lecture mode. He was not just eating dinner, he was holding a seminar on his own brilliance. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, ignoring proper etiquette to ensure everyone absorbed his wisdom. My parents nodded along like bobbleheads, mesmerized by terms like synergy and paradigm shift, even though I knew they had no idea what he was actually talking about. To them, his confidence was a proxy for competence. They saw a young man in a suit talking loud and fast, and they assumed he was the next Steve Jobs. Then his voice dropped to a reverent whisper. He looked around the table as if sharing a state secret. "You know who we are finally meeting next week, right? The ghost." My father gasped, audibly dropping his fork. "The ghost?" Richard asked, his eyes going wide with theatrics. "I thought that was just an urban legend in the venture capital world." Jamal shook his head solemnly, taking a long sip of the expensive wine I was forbidden from tasting. "Oh, he is real. And he is terrifying. They say he is this old recluse, probably some 70-year-old white guy who made his fortune in steel or oil back in the day. A real old-school shark. He never shows his face at public events, and he does not do press. But if he signs your check, you are made for life. I have heard he hates wasted potential and can smell fear. But I am not worried. I know how to handle these old, grumpy traditionalists. I will walk in there, shake his hand, look him in the eye, and he will respect an alpha male when he sees one." I quietly stabbed a piece of lettuce on my plate. It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. The grumpy 70-year-old recluse he was describing was currently wearing a $20 hoodie and listening to him butcher the concept of liquidity. I was the ghost. The nickname came from my ability to move into markets unseen and exit before anyone knew what happened, not because I was some spectral old man. I decided to test the waters. I wiped my mouth with a napkin and looked him directly in the eye. "That sounds impressive, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But if you are pitching to Ghost Capital, you might want to tighten up your financials. I read your public filing last week. Your customer acquisition cost is sky high compared to your lifetime value. What is your current EBITDA looking like for this quarter? Because if your burn rate is still outpacing revenue, that investor is going to tear you apart. The table went dead silent. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. My mother froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Jamal stared at me, blinking rapidly. For a split second, I saw panic in his eyes. He did not know the answer. He probably did not even know the real numbers, because he was too busy spending the seed money on appearances. But the panic was quickly replaced by a defensive sneer. He chuckled, shaking his head dismissively, as if a toddler had just tried to explain quantum physics. "Wow, look at Audrey trying to sound smart," he said, turning to my parents with a mocking grin. "Did you Google those words in the bathroom just to impress us? EBITDA, please. You do not even know what that stands for. Stick to what you know, sweetie, which is, well, nothing actually. Do not use business terms you do not understand to try and talk down to a CEO. It is embarrassing." My father immediately chimed in, his face red with irritation. "Audrey, stop trying to ruin the mood with your negativity. You are just jealous because Jamal is building an empire while you are building a collection of rejection letters. Let the men talk business and eat your salad." I looked down at my plate, smiling internally. They had no idea that the negativity they despised was the only thing that could have saved them. Jamal had just missed his only chance to practice his pitch on the very person who held his fate in her hands. The arrival of the seafood tower provided a brief interlude of silence as my family descended upon the lobster and oysters like vultures. Jamal wiped lemon juice from his fingers with a linen napkin and leaned back, studying me with a look of mock concern. He seemed to have decided that humiliating me intellectually regarding the EBITDA was not enough. He needed to degrade me socially. "You know, Audrey," he began, his voice dripping with condescending sweetness, "I have been thinking about your situation. It keeps me up at night, actually. It is not right for a woman of your age to be drifting aimlessly. I heard from Brittany that you have been unemployed for 2 years now. Is that right?" I did not answer. I simply sliced a cucumber from my side salad. Technically, I had not been employed by anyone for 5 years, because I was the employer, but I let the silence hang there. Jamal took my silence as shame. "Look, I am a problem solver. That is what CEOs do. We fix things, and I want to help you. BioHealth Solutions is expanding rapidly, and we have some openings that would be perfect for someone with your skill set." He paused for dramatic effect, looking around the table to ensure he had an audience. "We are looking for a new sanitation engineer for the night shift. You know, emptying trash bins, scrubbing the lab floors, making sure the toilets are sparkling for the real employees when they arrive in the morning. It pays $15 an hour, which I am pretty sure is more than whatever government handout you are living on right now. Plus, it is the night shift, so you won't have to worry about running into anyone important and embarrassing yourself." I stopped eating. The insult was so calculated, so precise that I almost admired the audacity of it. He was offering me a job cleaning the toilets in a building that I secretly owned. Before I could respond, my father Richard slammed his hand on the table. "That is a fantastic idea, Jamal." Richard looked at me with eyes cold and hard like stones. "You should take it, Audrey. You have been a burden on your potential for too long. It is high time you did some honest work. Stop making the family look bad with this starving artist routine. Jamal is offering you a lifeline. Do not be ungrateful." My mother nodded in agreement, sipping her $200 wine. "It would be good for you, dear," she added. "Humility builds character. And maybe if you work hard in a few years, Jamal might let you answer the phones." Jamal beamed, soaking in their praise like sunlight. He raised his glass of champagne. His gold watch glinted in the chandelier light. "Well then, let us make it official. To Audrey's new career path. May she finally make herself useful to society." Brittany giggled and raised her glass. To Audrey, she chirped. Everyone at the table raised their crystal flutes in a toast to my humiliation. They clinked glasses, the sound ringing through the restaurant like a bell tolling for my dignity. I looked at their smiling faces distorted through the crystal and the water in my glass. They looked so happy, so secure in their superiority. They thought they were throwing scraps to a beggar. They had no idea they were poking a sleeping dragon. I forced a tight smile and raised my water glass. To new beginnings, I said softly, and I meant it, because this was the beginning of the end for all of them. The laughter at the table was suffocating. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, replaced by the thick scent of expensive cologne and arrogance. I stood up abruptly, the legs of my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Jamal looked up with a predator's grin. "Where are you going, sanitation engineer?" he called out loud enough for the neighboring tables to turn their heads. "Do not start cleaning the toilets yet. We have not even had dessert." My father chuckled, shaking his head, as if my bladder was just another sign of my incompetence. I ignored them and walked toward the back of the restaurant, my sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished marble. I needed a moment, not to cry, but to calibrate. Inside the restroom, it was quiet. The walls were lined with gold leaf wallpaper, and the sinks were carved from black marble. I gripped the edge of the counter and stared at my reflection. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, illuminating the fraying strings of my hoodie and the dark circles under my eyes. I looked tired. I looked defeated. I looked exactly like the failure they wanted me to be. They saw a woman who could barely afford a haircut. They did not see the mind that had predicted 3 market crashes and built a fortune on the ruins. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was a spiderweb of cracks held together by a piece of clear tape. It was a prop I had maintained for 2 years, a physical symbol of my supposed poverty. To my family, this phone was proof that I could not even afford a screen repair. To me, it was the remote detonator for the bomb they were sitting on. I unlocked the device with a thumbprint. The operating system was custom-built, encrypted with military-grade security. I opened my secure messaging app and found the contact labeled Operations. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I knew what this would do. This was not just a financial withdrawal, it was an execution. Once I sent this command, the automated systems at Ghost Capital would freeze BioHealth's accounts. The credit lines would snap shut. The vendors would be notified of insolvency. And most importantly, the forensic accountants would descend like wolves at sunrise. I typed 2 sentences. Withdraw all capital from BioHealth Solutions immediately. Initiate full forensic audit at 800 hours. I read it once. Then I hit send. The message bubble turned green. Delivered. It was done. The empire of lies Jamal had built was already crumbling in the cloud servers, even as he sat outside eating lobster. I washed my hands slowly, watching the soap suds swirl down the drain, just like Jamal's career was about to do. I dried my hands on a cloth towel, took a deep breath, and walked back out into the dining room. When I returned to the table, dessert had arrived. A chocolate souffle sat in the center. Jamal was pouring more wine, his face flushed with alcohol in triumph. He looked up surprised to see me back so soon. "I thought you might have run away," he sneered. "Or maybe you were practicing your mopping technique in there." I sat down and looked him dead in the eye. My posture was different now. The slump was gone. "I am not going anywhere, Jamal." I said, my voice calm and steady. "In fact, I am looking forward to tomorrow morning. I have a feeling it is going to be a very big day for you." He took it as a compliment. "You bet it is," he said, raising his glass again. "Big things are coming, Audrey. Big things." I picked up my water glass and clinked it against his crystal flute. "Yes, they certainly are," I whispered. The glass made a hollow sound. I drank the water and it tasted like victory. I had barely washed the makeup off my face when the pounding started. It was 11 o'clock at night. I lived in a modest pre-war building in Capitol Hill, the kind with creaky floors and radiators that hissed. It was the apartment my grandmother had left me, and it was the only place I felt safe. But the banging on the door sounded like a police raid. I opened the door to find my parents standing in the hallway. My mother Susan was still wearing her pearls from dinner, but her face was tight with urgency. My father Richard pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. He scanned my small living room with his usual expression of disdain, noting the stack of books on the floor and the lack of designer furniture. We need to talk, my father said, tossing a thick manila envelope onto my coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud, disturbing the peace of my sanctuary. I pulled my robe tighter around myself. It is late, I said. What could possibly be so urgent that it could not wait until morning? My mother sat on the edge of my sofa as if she were afraid of catching a disease from the upholstery. It is about the apartment, Audrey, she said, her voice sharp and businesslike. We found a buyer, a cash buyer. They are willing to close in 48 hours if we sign tonight. I stared at her. This apartment belongs to me, I said. Grandma left it to me. My name is on the deed. Technically, my father interrupted, his voice booming in the small space. Your grandmother left it to the family. You just happened to be the one she favored. But that is irrelevant now. We need the equity. Jamal is in a bit of a tight spot with liquidity. He needs a bridge loan to cover some operational costs before the big investment from Ghost Capital comes through next week. I almost laughed. They wanted to sell the roof over my head to fund the man who had just offered me a job cleaning toilets. They wanted to pour my inheritance into a company that I had already secretly gutted an hour ago. Richard, you are not listening to me, my mother snapped. This is an investment. Jamal is going to be a billionaire, he told us tonight. Once that funding hits, he is going to take care of all of us. He promised to buy us a mansion in Medina. He even said he would buy you a condo in a better neighborhood. But right now, he needs cash to keep the lights on and show strength to the investors. My father stepped closer to me, looming over me with the same intimidation tactics he used when I was a child. Do not be selfish, Audrey, he said. Your sister is about to marry into royalty. This is our chance to elevate the entire family name. You are sitting here on $300,000 of dead equity while your brother-in-law is trying to change the world. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket and clicked it. It was a Mont Blanc pen, probably bought with money he did not have. Just sign the transfer of deed, he commanded, pointing at the dotted line. We already drafted the paperwork. We will handle the sale and give the money to Jamal as a personal loan. He will pay you back with interest. I looked at the papers. They had not just drafted a sale. They had drafted a quitclaim deed which would transfer the property to them for $1, effectively stripping me of my only asset. They were not asking for help. They were robbing me to feed their golden child's gambling addiction. My mother stood up and placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch cold and manipulative. Audrey, honey, think about the future, she cooed. Do you really want to live in this dump forever? Jamal is the future. Do not stand in the way of progress just because you are bitter. Be a good sister for once in your life. I looked at the pen in my father's hand, and then at the hopeful, greedy look in my mother's eyes. They truly believed the fantasy. They were willing to make me homeless on a gamble that was already lost. I took a deep breath and prepared to shatter their world. I placed the Mont Blanc pen gently on the coffee table, pushing it away from me, as if it were a loaded weapon. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. My father looked at the pen, then at me, his face slowly turning a shade of crimson that I associated with his worst outbursts. I am not signing it, I said softly. My voice did not shake. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to shrink away from his anger. My mother gasped, clutching her purse to her chest. Audrey, are you out of your mind? We told you this is just a bridge loan. Jamal will pay us back double in 6 months. Do you want to ruin your sister's happiness over a dusty old apartment? I stood up, meeting their eyes. It is not about the apartment, Mom. It is about where the money is going. I tried to warn you at dinner, but you would not listen. I know you think I am just an unemployed failure sitting at home all day, but I read, I research, and I have looked into biohealth solutions. My father took a threatening step forward, his hands balled into fists at his sides. You have looked into it, he mocked. What does that mean? You read some jealous blog post online. You think you know more than a CEO. I know that a company with 0 FDA approvals and high overhead cannot sustain its burn rate, I said, speaking faster now, trying to get the truth out before they shut me down completely. I know that Jamal is paying off early investors with money from new investors. I know he is shuffling debt between 3 different shell companies. Dad, please listen to me. It is a classic Ponzi scheme. If you give him this money, you will never see it again. I expected denial. I expected yelling. I did not expect the violence. The sound of his hand connecting with my cheek cracked through the room like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side and a sharp, stinging heat exploded across my face. I stumbled back, catching myself on the arm of the sofa. My ear rang with a high-pitched whine. I touched my cheek, my fingers coming away trembling. My mother did not scream. She did not rush to see if I was okay. She stood there looking at me with cold disappointment, as if I had been the one to strike him. "You are sick." My father spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You are so eaten up with jealousy that you would invent criminal accusations against your own family. You cannot stand that Brittany won. You cannot stand that she found a real man while you are alone in this rat hole. You are delusional, Audrey. Paranoid and delusional." He snatched the papers from the table, crumpling them in his fist. "We are done asking. We will find the money another way. But mark my words. When we are celebrating Jamal's success in our new mansion, do not bother calling. You are no daughter of mine." My mother gave me one last look, a mixture of pity and disgust. "You need help, Audrey," she said. "Serious psychiatric help." They turned and walked out, leaving the door wide open. I stood in the center of my living room, listening to their heavy footsteps fading down the hallway. My cheek throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I walked over to the door and closed it, locking the deadbolt. I slid down against the wood, hugging my knees to my chest. They had just disowned the only person who could save them. And as the shock of the slap faded, a cold resolve settled in my chest. If they wanted me to be a stranger, then I would be a stranger. And strangers do not show mercy in the boardroom. The next morning, while I was sitting in my apartment with a bag of frozen peas pressed against my swollen cheek, Jamal was facing the first tremor of the earthquake I had triggered. He was at Nobu entertaining 2 potential clients for a lunch that cost more than my monthly rent. He had ordered the omakase and a bottle of sake that was older than I was. When the bill came, he threw his platinum corporate card onto the tray with the casual indifference of a man who believes money is an infinite resource. Minutes later, the server returned not with a receipt, but with a polite whisper that shattered the atmosphere. "I am sorry, sir, the card was declined." Jamal laughed loudly, assuming it was a joke. "Try it again," he demanded, his voice booming across the quiet dining room. "That is a corporate black card. It has no limit. You probably swiped it wrong." The server apologized and tried again. And again. Finally, the manager had to come over and explain that the bank had put a hard freeze on the account. Jamal had to call Brittany to ask for her credit card number over the phone, lying that he had left his wallet in the car. The clients exchanged awkward glances. The facade of the billionaire genius was showing its first crack. He stormed back into the biohealth offices 20 minutes later, kicking open the glass doors. He marched straight to the office of the chief financial officer, a nervous man named David, who had been sweating through his shirt since 9 in the morning. "Fix it!" Jamal screamed, throwing the declined card at David's chest. "I was just humiliated in front of the investors. Why is my card not working? Call the bank and tell them I will sue them for embarrassment." David did not pick up the phone. He stood up slowly, holding a tablet with trembling hands. "It is not the bank, Jamal," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It is the funding. Ghost Capital. They pulled the plug." Jamal froze. "What do you mean they pulled the plug?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "We have a contract. They are depositing $5 million next week." David shook his head. "They invoked the insolvency clause. I got an email at 8 this morning. They have frozen all associated accounts pending a forensic audit. They are saying there are irregularities in our burn rate. They have locked us out of the operating accounts, Jamal. We cannot make payroll on Friday. We cannot even pay the electric bill." For a moment, the reality of the situation hung in the air like a guillotine blade. If the audit happened, they would find the cars, the jewelry, the apartment for the mistress. They would find everything. But Jamal's narcissism was a powerful shield. He refused to accept it. "It is a glitch," he insisted, pacing the room frantically. "It is just some computer error. The ghost would not do this to me." He believes in me. I will fix this. I will charm them. Do not tell anyone. Do not tell the staff, and absolutely do not tell Brittany. Just then his phone buzzed. It was Brittany. Jamal stared at the screen for a second, composing his face into a mask of confidence before answering. Hey baby, he said, his voice smooth as silk. Yeah, just a stupid banking error with the fraud department. Totally routine. Go buy that dress you wanted. I will sort it out. He hung up and looked at David with dead eyes. Cook the books he ordered. Make it look right before the auditors get here. I do not care what you have to do. Just fix it. He walked out of the office, adjusting his tie, convinced he could outrun the avalanche. He did not know that the snow had already buried him. 2 hours later, I was standing in the middle of a high-end bridal boutique in downtown Seattle, buried under a mountain of tulle and shopping bags. Brittany had insisted I come along, not because she valued my opinion, but because she needed a pack mule. She had spent the morning trying on gowns that cost more than most people make in a year, twirling in front of the mirrors, while I held her purse, her iced coffee, and her heavy winter coat. Finally, she stepped out of the dressing room in a custom creation of silk and hand-stitched crystals. It was breathtaking. It was also $20,000. She looked at herself in the trifold mirror, wiping away a tear that might have actually been real. This is it, she whispered. This is the dress. This is the dress that says I have arrived. She turned to the sales associate, a woman with severe glasses and an air of judgment, and nodded. Wrap it up. We are taking it today. We moved to the register. Brittany reached into her designer clutch and pulled out the Platinum American Express card Jamal had given her. It was a secondary card linked directly to the BioHealth corporate operating account. She slapped it onto the glass counter with a flourish, waiting for the admiration that usually accompanied such a gesture. The sales associate swiped the card. A sharp beep echoed through the quiet boutique. She frowned and swiped it again. Another beep. She looked at the screen, then at Brittany. I am sorry, miss, but the transaction has been declined. Brittany laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. That is impossible, she said, flipping her hair back. That is a corporate black card. It has no limit. My fiancé is Jamal Washington. Check your machine. It is probably the Wi-Fi. The associate sighed and tapped the screen. It is not the Wi-Fi, miss. The issuer has returned a code for insufficient funds and a freeze on the account. Do you have another form of payment? Brittany went pale. She started digging through her purse, but I knew what she would find. A maxed-out store credit card and a debit card with maybe $50 on it. She had bet everything on Jamal. She stood there for a moment, the silence stretching out painfully. Then she turned slowly to look at me. Her eyes were not pleading. They were demanding. Audrey, she snapped, pointing at her purse, which I was still holding. Give me your wallet. I blinked. Excuse me, I asked, thinking I had misheard. You heard me, Brittany hissed, stepping closer so the sales associate would not hear. Pay for the dress. I know you have that little savings account Grandma left you. Just put it on your card. Jamal is just having some banking glitches because he is moving millions of dollars around for the IPO. He will pay you back double tomorrow. Seriously, Audrey, do not make this awkward. I looked at her outstretched hand. She was asking me to drain my life savings to buy a dress for a wedding that was likely never going to happen. She truly believed that my financial stability existed solely to serve her vanity. She thought she was doing me a favor by letting me pay. I shifted the weight of the shopping bags in my arms and looked her dead in the eye. You want me to pay $20,000 for a dress when you just made fun of my car last night? Brittany rolled her eyes. Oh my God, get over yourself. It is an investment. Jamal will give you $40,000 tomorrow. Consider it the easiest money you have ever made. Now give me the card before they sell my dress to someone else. The sheer entitlement was staggering. She was not asking for help. She was demanding tribute. And for the first time in my life, I realized that saying no would be more satisfying than any revenge I could plan. I kept my hands firmly in my pockets, feeling the cool metal of my own credit card against my palm. It was a card with a limit high enough to buy the entire boutique, but Brittany would never know that. To her, I was just a failed investment, a broken appliance that refused to work when she pushed the button. I looked at her manicured hand, waiting expectantly for my wallet, and I shook my head slowly. I do not have $20,000, Brittany, I said, my voice low and controlled. And even if I did, I would not spend it on a dress for a wedding you cannot afford. The transformation was instant. The sweet smiling bride-to-be vanished, replaced by something ugly and twisted. The entitlement that had been simmering beneath the surface boiled over. She did not just get angry, she erupted. "You are lying!" she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "I know you have that inheritance money. You are just being a selfish, jealous witch because I am getting married and you are going to die alone with your cats." The boutique went deathly silent. A mother and daughter trying on veils in the corner stopped and stared. The sales associate took a nervous step back, clutching her clipboard to her chest. Brittany did not care who was watching. She stepped into my personal space, her face contorted. "You are useless, Audrey. Do you hear me? You are absolutely useless. You are 33 years old. If you do not have $20,000 to help your family in an emergency, then what is the point of you? Why do you even exist if you cannot contribute anything? You are just a leech sucking the joy out of everyone else's life." The words hung in the air, harsh and cruel. The sales associate looked at me with profound pity. She opened her mouth to intervene, saying, "Excuse me, miss. Please lower your voice or I will have to ask you to leave." Brittany spun around and snapped at the woman. "Shut up. I am the customer. I am the one marrying a CEO. You work in retail, so do not tell me what to do." I watched my sister in that moment and realized I did not feel hurt anymore. I felt nothing. The bond that had tethered me to her, the obligation to protect her because she was younger and weaker, finally snapped. She was not weak. She was a bully, wrapped in silk. I looked down at the pile of shopping bags I had been carrying for 3 hours. Her shoes, her makeup, her rehearsal dinner accessories. I slowly lowered them to the floor, dropping them at her feet. "Figure it out yourself, Brittany," I said. I turned my back on her. Behind me, I heard her shrieking, "Where are you going? Come back here. You cannot leave me here without a ride. Audrey, come back here right now." I walked toward the glass doors, my head held high. I pushed them open and stepped out onto the busy Seattle sidewalk. The cool air hit my face, flushing away the heat of the boutique. I hailed a cab and got in without looking back, leaving my sister standing in her dream dress with a maxed-out credit card and no way home. It was the first time in my life I had walked away, and I had never felt lighter. I did not hear from my parents for 48 hours after the incident at the bridal shop. I assumed they were sulking, or perhaps finally realizing the gravity of their financial situation. I was wrong. They were not reflecting, they were liquidating. On Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from one of my holding companies, Atlas Real Estate Ventures. It was an automated alert I had set up years ago for properties in my childhood neighborhood, just to keep an eye on market trends. But this alert was specific. A sale had just closed on a 4-bedroom colonial on Elm Street, my parents' house. I stared at the screen. They had sold the home I grew up in. The home where I learned to walk, where I hid in the attic to read, and where I was eventually made to feel like a stranger. They had listed it as a distressed asset for a quick cash sale. The price was shockingly low, almost 20% under market value. They were desperate for liquidity to feed the beast that was BioHealth Solutions. My pulse quickened as I opened the transaction details. The buyer listed was Atlas Real Estate Ventures, my own company. My portfolio manager had snatched it up instantly, recognizing the bargain. My parents had just sold their only true asset to the daughter they had disowned, and they did not even know it. I drove past the house that afternoon. A moving truck was already in the driveway. My father was directing the movers with the manic energy of a man trying to outrun his own anxiety. He looked up and saw my car slowing down. Instead of shame, a look of haughty defiance crossed his face. He waved a dismissive hand as if to say, "Look at us moving on to better things." They were not moving to a better investment. I later learned they had used the cash from the sale to lease a penthouse in a trendy downtown high-rise. It was a place for 20-year-old tech millionaires, not a retired couple with no income. They paid a year's lease up front with the house money and funneled the rest directly into Jamal's personal account. They were burning their lifeboat to keep Jamal's Titanic afloat for just a few more hours. My mother posted a photo on social media that evening from their new balcony. The caption read, "New chapter leveling up, leaving the past behind, for a brighter future with our successful family." I sat in my office and looked at the deed to their old house, now sitting securely in my digital vault. They thought they were leveling up. In reality, they were now homeless tenants living on borrowed time in a borrowed apartment. And their landlord, the faceless corporate entity they had just signed a lease with, was me too. I owned the building they had just moved into. They were trapped in my world, completely unaware that the walls closing in on them were built by the very person they called a failure. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of my parents' new apartment building felt like an ascent into madness. They had invited me over for what they called a family unity dinner, but the moment I walked through the door, I knew it was an ambush. The penthouse was sparsely furnished with rental pieces that looked too modern and too uncomfortable. The air smelled of expensive takeout and palpable anxiety. Jamal was not sitting at the table. He was pacing back and forth in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette framed by the city lights he was so desperate to own. He looked disheveled. His tie was loosened and there was a manic glint in his eyes that suggested he had not slept in days. My parents and Brittany sat on the edge of their seats, watching him with the terrified reverence of cult members watching their leader unravel. "Sit down, Audrey," Jamal commanded without turning around. "We need to discuss the energy in this family." I sat. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Jamal spun around, pointing an accusing finger at me. Everything was going perfectly until 3 days ago. My funding was secured. My credit lines were open. I was on top of the world. And then you showed up at my engagement party looking like a beggar, and suddenly everything stopped. The banks froze up. The investors went silent. It is not a coincidence. He walked toward me, his voice rising with every step. It is you. You are a black cloud, Audrey. You carry this vibration of failure and poverty, and it is infecting my company. I spoke to my spiritual advisor and he confirmed it. You are a jinx. Your jealousy is blocking my abundance. I looked at my father, expecting him to intervene, to tell Jamal that banking errors were not caused by bad vibes. Instead, my father nodded gravely. He is right, Audrey. You have always had a dark cloud over you. We cannot let your negativity ruin Jamal's big day tomorrow. Jamal slammed his hand on the table, making the plastic takeout containers jump. Tomorrow is the most important day of my life. The ghost is coming. I need the energy in that office to be pristine. I need winners only. So here is what is going to happen. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. You are going to come to BioHealth headquarters tomorrow morning at 7 sharp. You are going to stand in the lobby, and you are going to apologize. Not just to me, but to the universe. You are going to ask for forgiveness for your jealousy, and you are going to wish me success. You are going to cleanse the bad luck you brought into my life. If you do not do this, I will make sure you are cut off from this family forever. Brittany looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. Just do it, Audrey. Just say sorry so he can focus. Do not be selfish. I looked at the man who was blaming his financial crimes on my aura. He was desperate. He was grasping at straws, trying to find any reason for his collapse other than his own incompetence. He wanted me there to humiliate me one last time, to use me as a scapegoat for when the audit inevitably failed. I stood up slowly. My face was calm, but my heart was pounding with the anticipation of the kill. I will be there, Jamal, I said, my voice steady. I wouldn't miss it for the world. He smiled smugly, thinking he had broken me. Good, he said. Dress nice for once. I want the ghost to see that even my servants have class. I walked out of the penthouse knowing that I would indeed be at his office at 7 a.m., but I would not be there to apologize. I would be there to accept his resignation. I waited for Brittany in the lobby of the apartment building. The doorman watched me with suspicion, judging my hoodie and worn-out sneakers, but I stood my ground. I knew my sister would be coming down soon to pick up a delivery or head to a late-night spa appointment. She could never sit still when she was anxious. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped out, phone in hand, typing furiously. She did not see me until I stepped into her path. She gasped, clutching her chest, and dropped her phone. "God, Audrey," she shrieked. "Are you stalking me now? I thought Jamal told you to go home and pray for forgiveness." I ignored her tone. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was not the financial audit. It was something much more personal. My private investigator had compiled it alongside the business data, but I had hesitated to use it. Now, after seeing how deep in denial she was, I knew I had to try one last time. "I am not here to fight Brittany," I said, keeping my voice low so the doorman would not overhear. "I know you think I am the villain in your story, but I am the only person who is actually trying to protect you. Jamal is not just stealing money. He is stealing your future." I shoved the envelope into her hands. She tried to push it back, but I held firm. "Just look at it," I urged. "Please, before you marry him." Curiosity won out over pride. She ripped open the seal and pulled out the stack of high-resolution photographs. Her eyes widened as she shuffled through them. The first photo showed Jamal at a bistro with his lead secretary, a woman named Vanessa. They were holding hands. The next photo showed them entering a luxury apartment complex, the same one listed on the company expense reports as a satellite office. The final photo was unmistakable. It showed Jamal kissing Vanessa in the front seat of his Porsche, the same car he had thrown the keys to me for. I watched her face, expecting tears. I expected her to collapse, to ask me to take her away. I saw the recognition in her eyes. She knew Vanessa. She knew the car. She knew the truth. But then something terrifying happened. Her expression hardened. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cold, manic fury. She looked up at me and her eyes were full of hate. "You did this," she whispered. I blinked. "What?" She threw the photos at my chest. They fluttered to the marble floor like dead leaves. "You did this," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You photoshopped these. You spent all night on your computer making fake pictures to ruin my life." "Brittany, look at the timestamps," I said, pointing at the scattered images. "That was last night while you were trying on dresses." "Liar," she yelled, stomping on the photos with her expensive heels. "You are a liar and a snake, a poisonous, jealous snake. You cannot stand that I am happy. You cannot stand that Jamal loves me and not you. You would do anything to destroy us, even fake evidence." She was shaking not from sorrow but from the effort of maintaining her delusion. She needed Jamal to be the golden ticket. If he was a fraud, then she was just a fool in a $20,000 dress she couldn't afford. She chose the lie because the truth was too expensive. "Get out of here," she hissed, tears finally streaming down her face. "Get out before I call the police. I never want to see you again." I looked at my sister standing amidst the torn evidence of her fiancé's betrayal. I realized then that she was not a victim anymore. She was a volunteer. "I will go," I said softly, stepping back. "But keep the photos, Brittany. You might need them for the divorce attorney." I turned and walked out into the cold Seattle night, leaving her alone in the lobby, frantically picking up the pieces of the lie she was determined to live in. I had done my duty. Now the gloves were coming off. At 6 in the morning, Jamal was pacing his corner office like a caged tiger. He had not slept. The empty pizza boxes and half-drunk coffees scattered around the room were a testament to a night spent trying to fabricate numbers that would not add up. He was terrified. If the audit went through, he would be exposed as a fraud before lunch. He needed a miracle. Then his computer pinged. It was a single notification from the secure server of Ghost Capital. Jamal froze. His hand trembled as he reached for the mouse. He expected a lawsuit. He expected a termination notice. Instead, he read the words that he believed would save his life. The subject line read, "Urgent board meeting attendance. regarding chairman participation. The body of the email was brief and commanded authority. It stated that due to the irregularities flagged in the preliminary review, the chairman of Ghost Capital, known as the Ghost, would be attending the morning meeting in person to make a final decision on the funding. Jamal let out a scream of victory that echoed through the empty floor. He did not see this as a threat. He saw it as an opportunity. His narcissism rewrote the narrative instantly. In his mind, the Ghost was coming not to investigate him, but to meet the genius behind the brand. He convinced himself that he could charm this old man just like he had charmed everyone else. He grabbed his phone and dialed my father. "Dad, wake up," he shouted into the receiver. "Get everyone down to the office. Now." I could hear my father's confused voice on the other end asking what was wrong. "Nothing is wrong," Jamal laughed hysterically. "Everything is right. The Ghost is coming. The big man himself. He wants to meet me personally. This is it. This is the moment I become a legend. Bring Mom. Bring Brittany. I want my family there when I sign the deal of the century." After hanging up with my parents, he turned his attention to me. He wanted an audience, but he also wanted a punching bag. He wanted to make sure I saw him ascend to the throne so he could look down on me from a greater height. He opened our text thread. He typed quickly, his fingers flying across the screen. "Hey, scrub. The Ghost is coming to seal the deal personally. I told you I was untouchable. Get your cheap clothes down here by 7. Come see what a real successful man looks like when he is working. Don't be late. I want you to have a front row seat when I become a billionaire." I was sitting in my kitchen sipping black coffee when the message arrived. I read his taunt and felt a strange sense of calm. He was inviting the executioner to his own party, and he was handing me the axe. I set my mug down and stood up. I walked to my closet and pushed aside the gray hoodies and worn-out denim. Reaching into the back, I pulled out the garment bag I had not opened in 2 years. Inside was a charcoal gray Italian suit tailored to perfection and a pair of heels that clicked with authority. I typed a reply, but I did not send it. Instead, I just whispered to the empty room. "I will see you soon, Jamal." I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. The sister he knew was gone. The Ghost was ready to make an appearance. I grabbed my briefcase and headed out the door. The show was about to begin. The lobby of BioHealth Solutions was designed to intimidate. It was a cavern of glass and steel with a waterfall cascading down one wall and a ceiling that soared 3 stories high. It was the kind of architecture meant to scream success, even if the company inside was rotting from the core. When I arrived at 7:15, the morning sun was just hitting the glass, turning the atrium into a blinding cage of light. My family was already there, and they had dressed for a coronation. My mother, Susan, was wearing a Chanel suit that I knew she had rented. My father, Richard, wore a tuxedo which was painfully inappropriate for a morning business meeting, but he stood with his chest puffed out, as if he were waiting to accept a Nobel Prize. Brittany stood by the reception desk checking her makeup in a compact mirror, wearing a silk dress that cost more than my car. They looked like actors on a set playing the role of a wealthy family, but the desperation radiated off them like heat waves. I walked through the revolving doors. I had chosen my outfit carefully. Over the Italian suit I had selected the night before, I wore my old oversized beige trench coat. It was stained at the hem and missing a button. I had pulled my hair back into a messy bun. To them, I looked like the same failure I had always been. I wanted them to feel superior one last time. I wanted Jamal to feel safe in his arrogance before I pulled the floor out from under him. Jamal was barking orders at a team of videographers near the elevators. He had set up a professional camera crew to document the arrival of the Ghost. He wanted his moment of triumph recorded in 4K resolution. When he turned and saw me, his face twisted in horror. He marched over his polished shoes, clicking on the marble floor. "What is this?" he hissed, gesturing at my coat. "I told you to dress with class. You look like you just crawled out of a dumpster. The Ghost is going to be here any minute. If he sees you, he will think I run a shelter. not a biotech unicorn. My mother rushed over her face, pinched with embarrassment. Audrey, take that coat off immediately. Do you have anything decent underneath? Or did you do this on purpose just to humiliate us? I clutched the coat tighter around me, playing the part. It is cold outside, Mom, I said quietly. And this is the only coat I have. Jamal rubbed his temples, trying to control his breathing. He was sweating despite the air conditioning. Okay, forget it. It is too late to send you home. Security. A burly guard in a uniform stepped forward. Yes, Mr. Washington. Jamal pointed to a dark corner behind a large potted ficus plant, far away from the center of the lobby. Put her over there, in the back, and make sure she stays there. I do not want her anywhere near the camera frame. We are live streaming this to the board, and I cannot have a homeless-looking woman wandering into the shot. He turned his back on me, adjusting his cufflinks. And Audrey, do not speak. Do not breathe too loud. Just watch and try to learn what success looks like. I nodded and allowed the security guard to escort me to the corner. I stood behind the plant, hidden from view just as he wanted. From my vantage point, I could see the entire lobby. I saw the nervous sweat on Jamal's neck. I saw my parents rehearsing their smiles. I saw Brittany checking her phone, oblivious to the fact that her world was minutes away from imploding. They thought they were hiding the family's shame in the corner. They had no idea they had just positioned the executioner exactly where she needed to be to swing the axe. The conference room lights dimmed, casting a blue glow over the long mahogany table. Jamal stood at the front of the room, a laser pointer in his hand, and a confident smile plastered on his face. Behind him, a massive screen displayed a graph with a line shooting upward at a 90-degree angle. It was the kind of growth curve that did not exist in reality, only in the dreams of desperate men and the evidence files of the SEC. Ladies and gentlemen, Jamal began, his voice smooth and practiced. What you are looking at is not just a projection, it is a revolution. BioHealth Solutions has not only met our quarterly targets, we have obliterated them. Our proprietary technology has received preliminary clearance for Phase 3 trials, and our pre-orders have tripled in the last month alone. I stood in the shadows behind the ficus plant, listening to him weave a tapestry of lies. I knew for a fact that the technology did not exist. I knew the Phase 3 trials were a fabrication because I had spoken to the FDA compliance officer myself just yesterday. And the pre-orders were likely just invoices he had sent to shell companies he created. It was not just a sales pitch, it was a federal crime in progress. My parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Every time Jamal paused for effect, my father Richard would nod vigorously, nudging my mother. That is brilliant, Susan, he whispered loud enough for the board members to hear. That is pure genius. Look at those numbers. We are going to be rich. My mother clasped her hands together, looking at Jamal as if he were a televangelist promising salvation. She did not understand a single metric on the screen, but she understood the greed. She turned to look for me in the back corner, catching my eye through the leaves of the plant. She smirked, mouthing the word, "Learn," to me. She wanted me to learn how to lie, how to cheat, and how to destroy a future. Jamal clicked to the final slide. It showed a projected revenue of $100 million by the end of the fiscal year. The few legitimate board members in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging skeptical glances. They knew the numbers were inflated, but they were too polite, or perhaps too intimidated, to interrupt the performance. And now, Jamal said, spreading his arms wide like a ringmaster. We have reached the pivotal moment of our journey. We have proven our worth. We have built the foundation. All we need now is the fuel to launch this rocket into the stratosphere. He paused, letting the silence build. He looked toward the double mahogany doors at the back of the room, the very doors I had entered through earlier. I have been in secret negotiations for months with a partner who needs no introduction. Jamal announced, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. A visionary who sees what others miss. A legend in the industry who has personally vetted our operations and chosen to back us with his vast fortune. Brittany held her breath, clutching her purse. My father straightened his tie, preparing to meet a billionaire. Please join me in welcoming our new strategic partner and majority shareholder, Jamal shouted, gesturing dramatically toward the empty doorway. The man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Ghost. The room erupted in applause, led enthusiastically by my parents. All eyes turned to the doors, waiting for an elderly white man in a suit to walk through and validate their delusions. Jamal stood frozen in a pose of welcoming triumph, his eyes locked on the entrance. He was ready for his savior. He had no idea that his judge and jury was already standing behind him. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the conference room swung open with a theatrical groan that silenced the applause. Jamal straightened his tie, beaming with anticipation. My parents leaned forward in their seats, practically vibrating with excitement, ready to lay eyes on the billionaire who would validate their entire existence. But no elderly man walked through the threshold. Instead, a phalanx of 6 individuals in matching black suits marched into the room with military precision. They moved like a single organism, parting the air with an aura of absolute authority. These were not investors. They were sharks in human skin, the elite legal and security team of Ghost Capital. They carried leather briefcases that looked heavy enough to crush a man's soul, and they wore earpieces that blinked with silent commands. Jamal's smile faltered. He looked past them, searching the hallway for the frail old man he had invented in his mind. "Where is he?" Jamal asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Where is Mr. Ghost?" The lead attorney, a woman with eyes like flint, stopped at the head of the conference table. She did not look at Jamal. She turned slowly, pivoting on her heel until she was facing the back corner of the room, the dark corner behind the ficus plant where I had been banished. "The chairman is already present," she stated, her voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. A confused murmur rippled through the board members. Jamal laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that bordered on hysteria. "What are you talking about? There is nobody back there except the help." I stepped out from behind the glossy leaves of the ficus. The security guard Jamal had hired to keep me hidden made a move to intercept me, but one of the Ghost Capital bodyguards stepped forward with a subtle shift of his weight that said, "Sit down or be put down." The guard froze and stepped back against the wall. I began to walk down the center of the room. The sound of my sneakers had been replaced by the sharp, authoritative click of the heels I had been wearing under my disguise. "Audrey, sit down." My father hissed, his face turning purple. "You are ruining the most important moment of our lives. Get back in your corner." My mother covered her eyes. "Oh God," she moaned. "She is going to beg for money in front of the investors. Somebody stop her." I ignored them. I ignored Jamal, who was now waving his arms frantically at his own security team. I walked through the path the lawyers had cleared for me, their heads bowing slightly in deference as I passed. I ascended the small platform at the front of the room and stood next to Jamal. He looked down at me with pure venom. "Get off my stage," he whispered through gritted teeth. "I will kill you for this." I looked at him calmly and reached for the buttons of my stained beige trench coat. One by one, I undid them, letting the anticipation build. With a shrug of my shoulders, I let the dirty fabric slide down my arms, pooling on the floor like a shed skin. Underneath was the charcoal Italian suit, tailored to within a millimeter of perfection. It screamed power. On the lapel, a platinum brooch in the shape of a phantom gleamed under the conference lights. It was the exact logo on the letterhead in Jamal's hand. I smoothed the lapel and turned to the stunned room. "I believe you were waiting for me, gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting without a microphone. "Please be seated. The meeting has now officially begun." Jamal looked at me as if I had just grown a second head. The transformation from the downtrodden sister in the hoodie to the corporate shark in the Italian suit was too much for his brain to process. His narcissism would not allow him to see the truth standing right in front of him. Instead, he defaulted to the only defense mechanism he had left, which was blind rage. "Are you insane?" he screamed, his voice cracking and echoing off the glass walls. "You have officially lost your mind. What is this, a costume party? You think because you stole a suit and bought a fake pin, you can hijack my meeting? Get down from there immediately." He lunged toward me, intending to physically drag me off the platform, but he was stopped by a wall of muscle. The head of my security detail stepped between us, his hand resting casually but firmly on Jamal's chest, pushing him back with zero effort. "Get your hands off me!" Jamal shrieked, looking around frantically. "David, where is my security? Why are these people here? Call the police. I want this woman arrested for trespassing and corporate espionage." David, the chief financial officer who had been sweating profusely since the meeting, slowly pushed his chair back. He looked at Jamal with a mixture of pity and fear. Then he stood up. He did not look at the police. He did not look at the security guards. He turned his body toward me and bowed his head in a gesture of absolute submission. "Good morning, Madam Chairman," David said, his voice trembling slightly, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "We have prepared the financial disclosures as you requested. The audit team has full access to the server room." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It was the sound of a dozen realities shattering simultaneously. The board members who had been confused a moment ago now sat up straighter, recognizing the shift in power. They looked from the cowering CFO to the woman standing on the podium, and the math finally clicked. Jamal froze. He looked at David, then at me, then back at David. "What did you call her?" he whispered, his face draining of color. "David, what did you just call her?" "She is a waitress. She is unemployed. Stop playing games." "Madam Chairman," David repeated louder this time. "She is the ghost, Jamal. She owns the holding company. She owns the debt. She owns the building. She owns us." In the front row, my father Richard was in the middle of taking a sip of water to calm his nerves. His brain tried to reject the information. His daughter, the failure, the disappointment, the scapegoat, was the billionaire investor they had been worshipping for weeks. The cognitive dissonance was too great. His hand went numb. The heavy crystal tumbler slipped from his fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot exploding into 1,000 shards of glass and splashing ice water onto his polished tuxedo shoes. Richard did not move to clean it up. He did not even look down. His mouth hung open, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at me as if he were seeing a stranger. Beside him, my mother Susan let out a small, strangled whimper, clutching her Chanel bag like a shield. I looked down at my father at the mess he had made on the floor. It was a perfect metaphor for his parenting, broken cold and impossible to put back together. I turned my attention back to the man who had mocked me for 2 years. I took a step forward and Jamal took an instinctive step back, stumbling over his own feet. "Sit down, Jamal," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You wanted a meeting with the owner. You have got one. Now sit down before I have you removed from my building." I walked slowly toward the head of the conference table, where Jamal was still standing. He was gripping the edge of the mahogany surface so tightly, his knuckles were white. He looked like a captain who had just realized his ship was not only sinking, but was already underwater. I stopped directly in front of him. He was physically taller than me, but in that moment, he looked incredibly small, shrinking under the weight of a reality he could not comprehend. "Excuse me," I said, my voice soft but echoing in the silent room. "You are standing in my seat." He moved automatically. His brain was so overloaded with shock that his body just obeyed the command without question. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the leg of the easel holding his fake charts. I stepped into the space he had vacated. I took a moment to smooth the fabric of my charcoal suit before lowering myself into the high-backed leather executive chair. It was the chair he had specially ordered for this meeting, the throne he had intended to rule from. Now, it belonged to me. I placed my hands on the table, intertwining my fingers, and looked up at him. The room was deathly quiet. The air conditioning hummed a low note of tension. I swiveled the chair slightly to face him, fully locking eyes with the man who had spent 2 years treating me like a second-class citizen. "I seem to remember a specific conversation from dinner the other night, Jamal," I said, keeping my tone conversational, almost pleasant. "You told the table that you were going to make the ghost kneel. You said you would make the old man beg to give you money. You were quite descriptive about your dominance." I leaned forward slightly, the leather creaking under my weight. Well, here I am. I am the ghost. And I am waiting. Make me kneel, Jamal. Jamal opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on a dock. His skin, usually glowing with expensive treatments and self-assurance, had turned a sickly, ashy shade of gray. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. He looked at the board members seeking an ally, but they were all studying their fingernails or looking at me with newfound respect. He looked at my parents, but they were frozen in their seats, paralyzed by the sudden shift in the universe. "Audrey, wait!" he finally stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "This is—" I did not know. How could I know? You never told me. We are family. You cannot do this to family. It was just a joke. We were just having fun. The audacity was breathtaking. Minutes ago, he had ordered security to throw me out. He had called me a jinx and a failure. Now that he knew I held the checkbook, he was suddenly invoking the sacred bond of family. I did not smile. I did not blink. I simply stared at him, letting the silence stretch out until it became physically painful for him. He began to tremble. His hands shook uncontrollably, and he had to grab the back of a chair to steady himself. He was realizing that the charm, the buzzwords, and the bravado that had gotten him this far were useless against the cold, hard wall of my authority. He was not a CEO anymore. He was just a boy who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar, and the punishment was going to be severe. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick binder. It hit the mahogany table with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel striking a block. The room was so silent I could hear the hum of the hard drives in the server room down the hall. Jamal was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his eyes darting around the room looking for an exit that did not exist. I opened the binder to the first tab marked Discretionary Spending. I adjusted the microphone on the podium, slightly ensuring my voice would be recorded clearly for the legal proceedings that were sure to follow. Let us review the allocation of capital. I said, my voice cool and detached. I want the board to understand exactly where the seed funding went, because it certainly did not go into research and development. I ran my finger down the column of figures. Item number 1. A 2024 Ferrari Purosangue. Cost $312,000. In the ledger, this is listed under Logistics and Transportation Prototypes. I looked up at Jamal. You told me to be careful with your car in the parking lot. You told me it was worth more than my life. But looking at this transaction history, it appears you purchased it using the initial wire transfer from Ghost Ventures. Technically, Jamal, I do not just park that car. I own it. And since you listed it as a company prototype, I am afraid you cannot take it home with you today. Jamal opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. He looked like a man watching his house burn down in slow motion. I turned the page. Item number 2. A 5-carat platinum engagement ring. Cost $55,000. Listed as office supplies and mineral samples. I looked past Jamal to where my sister was standing near the door. Brittany looked down at her hand, the ring suddenly feeling heavy and cold. She tried to cover it with her other hand, but it was too late. That is a beautiful piece of jewelry, Brittany, I said. It is a shame it is evidence in a federal fraud investigation. You are wearing stolen property. You might want to take it off before the marshals arrive. Brittany let out a sob, her face crumpling. My mother reached out to steady her, but her own hands were shaking too hard to offer any comfort. Now for the most interesting item, I continued, my voice dropping an octave. Item number 3. A 12-month lease on a luxury penthouse in the Belltown district. Monthly rent $8,000. Listed as off-site data storage. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I looked at the board members who were now furiously taking notes. We checked the occupancy of this data storage unit. It seems it is not housing servers. It is housing a Ms. Vanessa Tate. Jamal lunged forward, his face twisting into a mask of pure panic. Stop reading, he screamed. Stop it right now. You cannot do this. This is private. I ignored him, staring him down until he shrank back. Vanessa Tate, your lead secretary, And judging by the surveillance photos included in Appendix B, she is also your mistress. Oh, I apologize. I assumed Brittany knew. My mistake. A gasp went through the room. Brittany let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She looked at Jamal with horror, finally seeing the monster behind the mask. I closed the binder with a sharp snap. You see, Jamal, none of this money came from sales. None of it came from profits. It all came from the blind angel investment round. My round. You bought your car, your ring, and your mistress with my money. You have been living like a king on the charity of the woman you called a peasant, and now the peasant is calling in the debt. I turned the page of the binder with a deliberate slowness that made the sound echo like a gunshot in the silent room. The personal humiliation was over, but I was not finished. Destroying his relationship was for Brittany. What came next was for justice. Now let us discuss the product, I said, my voice hardening into steel. You stood on this stage 10 minutes ago and told this board that BioHealth Solutions had received preliminary clearance for Phase 3 FDA trials. You showed us a letter of authorization signed by Dr. Marcus Thorne of the Regulatory Committee. I pulled a document from the binder and held it up. It was the letter Jamal had displayed on the screen. It looked official, complete with the Department of Health and Human Services seal and a complex watermark. This is a very impressive forgery, Jamal. I mean that sincerely. The graphic design work is top tier. You almost got the font right. I let the paper drift from my hand to the floor, where it landed next to the photos of his mistress. Then I pulled out a second document. This one was much less decorative. It was printed on plain paper and stamped with a red ink that seemed to burn the eyes of everyone in the room. However, this is the actual correspondence I received yesterday from the real Dr. Marcus Thorne. It is a cease and desist order. It states that BioHealth Solutions has never submitted a single application for review. It also states that the prototype you claim to have developed does not exist. According to their inspectors, your lab is empty. There are no scientists, there are no trials. There are just empty beakers and a rented office space used to stage photos for your investor deck. A collective gasp swept through the room. The board members who had been eyeing their exit strategies suddenly looked like they wanted to vomit. My father Richard gripped the arms of his chair, his face draining of all color. He whispered the word fraud to himself as if tasting the ash of his own ambition. Jamal tried to speak, but his voice was a broken rasp. It is a misunderstanding, he croaked. The paperwork is just delayed. I can explain. You cannot explain this away, I interrupted, slamming the binder shut. This is not a misunderstanding. This is not bad management. This is criminal fraud. You solicited millions of dollars from investors based on fabricated government documents. You forged the seal of a federal agency. Do you know what the penalty is for that, Jamal? I leaned over the podium looking down at him. It is not a slap on the wrist. It is not a fine. It is 20 years in a federal penitentiary. You did not build a unicorn startup. You built a crime scene. And every person in this room who signed off on these financials without due diligence is an accessory. I looked at David, the CFO, who was now weeping silently into his hands. And I looked at my parents who had mortgaged their future to buy stock in a company that was literally nothing but smoke and mirrors. You called me a failure, I said quietly, addressing the room. You laughed at my joblessness. But while you were playing pretend, I was doing the math. And the math says this company is worth exactly $0. In fact, with the legal fees you are about to incur, it is worth significantly less than that. Jamal slumped into a chair, his legs finally giving out. The arrogance was gone. The bravado was gone. All that was left was a terrified con artist realizing that the game was over and he had lost to the one player he never thought to fear. I pulled a pen from the inside pocket of my jacket. It was a Mont Blanc Meisterstück, the exact same model my father had used to intimidate me in my own living room just 48 hours ago. The only difference was that mine was paid for with my own earnings, not bought on credit to maintain an illusion of wealth. I slid a single sheet of crisp white paper across the mahogany table. It glided over the polished surface and came to a stop, right at the edge of Jamal's trembling hands. Sign it. I said, my voice echoing in the silent boardroom. Jamal looked down at the document, his eyes unfocused. "What is this?" he whispered. "It is your termination notice," I replied. "You are being removed from your position as CEO effective immediately for cause, specifically for gross negligence, embezzlement, and fraud. Under the bylaws of the company which you signed without reading in your arrogance, the board has the right to remove you without severance." "But I own the company," he stammered, looking up at me with tears welling in his eyes. "You cannot fire me from my own company." I shook my head slowly. "You do not own anything, Jamal, and under the terms of the investment agreement strictly regarding cases of proven fraud, I am activating the liquidation clause. That means Ghost Capital now assumes full legal ownership of all physical and intellectual assets to recoup our losses. The servers, the furniture, the patent filings, and the inventory. Even the suit you are wearing, which was purchased with company funds. It all belongs to me now." I motioned to the security team. "Please escort Mr. Washington to the holding area until the authorities arrive. And take his phone. That is company property too." As two guards stepped forward to lift Jamal out of his chair, I turned away from the broken man and looked at the front row. My parents were huddled together, looking small and gray under the harsh fluorescent lights. My father, Richard, met my eyes, and for the first time in his life, I saw genuine fear. "Audrey," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What about our investment? We gave him $500,000. We sold the house. We gave him everything we had. That was our retirement. That was our life." I walked over to them until I was standing right in front of the seats they had taken with such pride just an hour ago. I looked at my mother, Susan, who was clutching her pearls as if they could save her. I looked at my father, who had slapped me across the face for trying to warn him. "I hate to be the one to tell you this, Dad," I said, my voice devoid of pity. "But that money is gone. It did not go into a secured account. Jamal spent it on maintaining an illusion. He used your money to pay for the engagement party, the lease on the penthouse, and the hush money for his mistress." My mother let out a strangled sob, covering her mouth with her hand. "Since you invested directly in a fraudulent entity and not through a protected fund, your equity is worthless," I continued. "There is nothing to recover. You gambled on the golden child and you lost. The house is gone. The cash is gone. Congratulations, Mom and Dad, you are officially bankrupt." The heavy doors of the conference room did not just open this time, they were thrown open with enough force to bounce against the stops. A team of agents in blue windbreakers with yellow lettering swarmed into the room. They moved with a speed and aggression that made the corporate security look like mall cops. One of them shouted, "Federal agents, everybody stay where you are." Jamal scrambled backward, knocking over his chair. He tried to hide behind the podium he had been preaching from just minutes ago, but there was nowhere to go. Two agents grabbed him by the arms, hauling him upright like a sack of flour. "Jamal Washington, you are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and aggravated identity theft," the lead agent announced. His voice was loud enough to be picked up by the boom microphone that was still hovering overhead. That was the cruelest irony of the moment. The camera crew Jamal had hired to document his ascension was now broadcasting his downfall in high definition to the entire tech world. The cameraman looked confused, unsure whether to cut the feed, but I caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. "Keep rolling. Let the world see exactly who Jamal Washington really is." Jamal began to struggle as the metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. "No, no, this is a mistake," he screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. "I am a CEO. You cannot touch me. My lawyer will sue you all." The agents ignored him, forcing him toward the door. As they dragged him past the table, he locked eyes with me. His face was a mask of sheer terror. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the pathetic desperation of a drowning man. "Audrey, please," he begged, his voice cracking. Tell them it was just a misunderstanding. We are family. You cannot let them take me to prison. I will pay it back. I swear I will pay it back. Just help me." I did not say a word. I did not even blink. I simply reached for the glass of water on the table and took a slow, deliberate sip. I watched him over the rim of the glass, my expression completely blank. To me, he was already a ghost. He was a bad memory that was being erased from the hard drive of my life. "Audrey, help me!" he shrieked as they pushed him through the doorway. The last thing he saw before the doors closed was me turning my back on him to address the stunned board members. The room was silent, except for the sound of my mother sobbing softly in the front row. She was watching her golden child being hauled away in chains, and the reality was finally sinking in. The fairy tale was over, and the nightmare had just begun. I looked at the camera lens, the red recording light still blinking steady and unblinking. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," I said calmly, "I apologize for the interruption. Now that the criminal element has been removed, shall we discuss the restructuring of this company?" As the echo of Jamal's screams faded down the hallway, the atmosphere in the boardroom shifted from chaotic to suffocating. The federal agents had secured the perimeter, but one officer remained standing by the door, holding it open for a final guest. I nodded to him, signaling that it was time for the curtain call. Vanessa Tate walked in. She was not in handcuffs. That was the detail that broke my sister's composure before a word was even spoken. Vanessa was wearing a pencil skirt and a silk blouse, looking every inch the professional executive assistant she was supposed to be. But her eyes were cold hard and focused entirely on self-preservation. She had evidently traded her loyalty for immunity, and she was ready to sing. Brittany looked up from her chair, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. She recognized Vanessa immediately. They had gone to lunch together. Vanessa had helped her coordinate the seating charts for the wedding. They were friends, or so Brittany thought. "Vanessa." Brittany whispered, her voice trembling. You knew everything, didn't you?" Vanessa stopped at the end of the table. She did not look guilty. She looked annoyed, as if this emotional display was wasting her time. "Look, Brittany," she said, her tone flat and businesslike. "I am not going to federal prison for a man who is too stupid to hide his IP address. I gave the agents the hard drives. I gave them the passcodes. It is over." "But why?" Brittany wailed. "Why did you do this to me? I thought we were friends. Jamal loved me. He told me I was his soulmate." Vanessa laughed. It was a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the room like a scalpel. "Soulmate," she repeated, shaking her head. "Honey, he called you his useful idiot. That was his nickname for you. The useful idiot." The air left the room. My parents froze, their faces pale masks of shock. "He used to read your text messages out loud to me in bed." Vanessa continued, twisting the knife with precise malice. "We would lie there and laugh about how desperate you were. He said you were so hungry for status that you would believe anything he told you as long as it came with a designer label. He didn't want to marry you. He wanted your parents' retirement fund and your sister's inheritance. You were just the entry fee." Brittany shook her head violently, covering her ears with her hands. "Stop it," she screamed. "You are lying. He loved me. He bought me the ring." "The ring I bought with the corporate card," Vanessa corrected. "The ring we picked out together during our lunch break while laughing about how you wouldn't know the difference between high-grade platinum and the cheap setting we actually got. He said a girl like you cares about the size of the rock, not the quality of the stone." That was the breaking point. The illusion Brittany had built her entire identity around did not just crack, it shattered into dust. She let out a guttural sob, a sound of pure animalistic pain, and slid out of her chair. She collapsed onto the expensive carpet of the boardroom, curling into a ball. She didn't just cry, she keened, rocking back and forth, clutching her chest as if her heart had physically ruptured. My mother made a move to go to her but stopped halfway, uncertain of what to do. The daughter she had raised to be a trophy was now broken on the floor. I looked at Vanessa. "You have done your part," I said coldly. "The agents are waiting for your official statement." Vanessa smoothed her skirt, gave a dismissive look at the sobbing heap on the floor, and walked out. She felt no remorse. In the world my family so desperately wanted to be part of, there were no friends, only accomplices and witnesses. And Brittany had just learned the hard way that she was neither. The chaos of the arrests had settled into a heavy, suffocating silence, leaving only the sound of my sister's jagged breathing from the floor. I stood at the head of the table, organizing the papers back into my leather binder. The show was over, but the consequences were still rippling outward, knocking down the final dominoes of my family's life. My father, Richard, was staring blankly at the empty doorway where the agents had dragged Jamal. He looked like a man waking up from a coma into a nightmare. Then his phone buzzed. It was a sharp, insistent vibration against the mahogany table. He ignored it at first, probably thinking it was a news alert about the arrest. But then it buzzed again, and again, a relentless stream of notifications. He picked it up, his hand shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. He swiped the screen, and as he read, the blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly shade of gray. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. "Susan?" He whispered, his voice barely audible. "We have a problem." My mother looked up from where she was kneeling beside Brittany. "What now?" "Richard," she snapped, her patience frayed to the breaking point. What could possibly be worse than this? My father held up the phone. "It is the bank. And the leasing office. They have frozen everything." He scrolled through the emails, reading them aloud in a daze. "The first one is from First National. Our checking account. Our savings, even the joint account we opened for the business loan. They have all been flagged for suspicious activity connected to a federal money laundering investigation. We cannot access a single cent." My mother stood up, clutching her chest. "That is a mistake," she insisted. "We are victims here, Richard. Tell them we are victims." He shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "It does not matter. We signed the papers, Susan. We co-signed the loans. We are listed as officers of the shell companies Jamal set up. Until the FBI clears us, which could take years, we are financially paralyzed." But the final blow was the email from the building management. The high-rise penthouse they had moved into with such arrogance just days ago. My father read the notification and let out a sound like a wounded animal. "We are being evicted," he choked out. "The lease payment. The check Jamal wrote to cover the year. It bounced. The funds were seized by the DOJ this morning. The management company says we have unauthorized occupancy. They are giving us 4 hours to vacate the premises before they change the locks." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. "Audrey, we have nowhere to go. We sold the house. The furniture is gone. If they lock us out of the apartment, we are on the street." I looked at him calmly, snapping the lock on my briefcase. "I know," I said. He blinked, confused. "How do you know?" "Because I own the building, Dad." I watched the realization hit him. The management company he was terrified of was just another branch of the empire I had built, while he was busy calling me a failure. "I have a zero-tolerance policy for tenants involved in federal criminal investigations." I explained, my voice devoid of emotion. "It is bad for the property value. My building manager is just following protocol. You have 4 hours to get your things. I suggest you hurry. Traffic in Seattle is terrible this time of day." My mother let out a scream of frustration, lunging toward me, but stopping short when my security guard stepped forward. "You cannot do this," she wailed. "We are your parents." I looked at the woman who had watched me eat a side salad while she drank $200 wine. "You made it very clear that family is about contribution," I said, "and right now you have nothing to contribute." I turned and walked toward the door, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own greed, faced with the reality of being homeless in a city I owned. I walked out of the biohealth headquarters and into the cool Seattle air. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the meeting was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. I signaled to my driver, who was waiting with the rear door of my black sedan open. But before I could reach the sanctuary of the vehicle, I heard the frantic clicking of heels and the heavy, labored breathing of 2 people running who were not built for speed. "Audrey, wait. Please wait." I stopped and turned slowly. My parents were rushing toward me. My mother, Susan, had lost her composure entirely. Her hair was coming undone and mascara streaked her cheeks. My father, Richard, was red-faced and sweating, his tuxedo jacket flapping open to reveal a shirt stained with his own nervous sweat. They did not look like the pillars of society they pretended to be. They looked like desperate refugees fleeing a disaster zone they had created. My mother reached out trying to grab my arm, but my security detail stepped in front of her. She collapsed against the guard, weeping. "Audrey, you cannot do this," she sobbed. "We are your parents. I gave birth to you. You cannot leave us on the street. We have nowhere to go. The bank cards do not work. The car is low on gas. We are old people, Audrey. You cannot be this cruel." I watched her histrionics with a detached curiosity. Just 2 hours ago, she had laughed when Jamal offered me a job cleaning toilets. Now she was invoking the sacred bond of motherhood. Then my father stepped forward. He tried to compose himself to summon some shred of his former authority, but his eyes betrayed his terror. He held up his hands in a placating gesture, forcing a trembling smile onto his face. "Audrey, listen to me," he panted. "I know you are angry, and you have every right to be, but you need to understand the bigger picture." He took a step closer, ignoring the warning glare of the bodyguard. "I knew you had it in you all along. Do you really think I believed you were a failure? No. I was pushing you. I was using reverse psychology. I had to be hard on you to unlock your potential. I treated you like that to make you tough enough to survive in this world. And look, it worked. You are a shark now. I made you a shark." I almost laughed. It was the ultimate gaslighting maneuver. He was trying to rewrite decades of neglect and emotional abuse as a master plan of parenting. He wanted credit for my success because he was the obstacle I had to overcome. I looked at him, studying the lines of his face. He truly believed it. He had to believe it, because the alternative was admitting that he had bet everything on a fraud and thrown away a genius. "You are not a mentor, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the parking garage noise. "You were a bully. You did not push me to succeed. You pushed me away. But we are family," my mother wailed. "You have billions. What is a few thousand to you? Just buy us a house. Just give us an allowance. We will apologize. We will do anything." I looked at them both. They were not sorry for what they did. They were sorry they had lost. They were sorry the money tap had been turned off. They looked at me and saw an ATM, not a daughter. I reached into my purse. For a second, hope flared in their eyes. They thought I was reaching for a checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "I have something for you," I said. My father stepped forward eagerly, his hand outstretched. "Thank you, Audrey. I knew you were reasonable. I knew you loved us." I held the paper out. It was not a check. It was the receipt from the restaurant dinner, the one where I had eaten a side salad while they feasted on lobster. "You kept this?" my father asked, confused, staring at the grease-stained paper. "Read it," I said, "and then we can talk about who owes who." My father stared at the crumpled slip of paper in his hand. His eyes scanned the itemized list of lobster bisque, filet mignon, and vintage Cabernet. He looked up at me, bewildered and slightly insulted. "It is just a receipt, Audrey," he sputtered. "Why are you giving me this? We need cash. We need a place to sleep. What am I supposed to do with a piece of paper from a dinner we had 3 days ago?" I took a step closer, my heels clicking sharply on the concrete. "Do you remember what you said to me that night, Dad?" I asked, my voice cutting through the damp garage air. "You told me that I was an embarrassment. You said my old car and my lack of ambition were making the family lose face. You were terrified that the waiter or the other diners would realize that your daughter was not as successful as you pretended to be. You said I was a stain on the Washington legacy." My mother sniffed, wiping her nose with a silk handkerchief. "We were just stressed, Audrey. We wanted you to be better." I pointed to the receipt in my father's trembling hand. "You made me pay for my own side salad because you said you were tired of subsidizing my failure. You wanted to teach me a lesson about the value of money. Well, I learned it." I leaned in close so they could see the hardness in my eyes. "I learned that money buys leverage. And right now, I have all of it." My father crumpled the receipt in his fist. "So this is revenge. You are punishing us because we were tough on you. You are going to let your parents starve because of a grudge. No, I said calmly. I am actually saving you. He blinked. Saving us. You just evicted us. I am saving your freedom, I corrected. I turned to look at the glass doors of the office building where the FBI agents were currently bagging evidence. Do you realize that your names are on every loan document Jamal signed? Do you realize that by selling the house and funneling the money into a shell company, you technically committed money laundering? The federal prosecutor wanted to arrest you both along with Jamal. He saw you as co-conspirators. My parents went rigid. The blood drained from my mother's face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. I spent the last hour convincing the agents that you were not criminal masterminds, I continued. I told them you were just gullible elderly people who were manipulated by a con artist. I had my legal team redact certain emails where you discussed hiding assets. I used my influence as the primary victim to request leniency for you. I took the receipt back from my father's hand and smoothed it out. If I had not intervened, you would be in the back of a squad car right now, heading to a holding cell next to Jamal. That is my gift to you. I am keeping you out of prison. I am saving the family reputation from the ultimate disgrace of having 3 felons instead of just 1. I folded the receipt and put it back in my pocket. So, when you are sleeping in a motel tonight using whatever cash you have left in your pockets, do not curse me. Thank me. Because the only reason you are walking out of here is because I decided to show you the mercy you never showed me. I turned around and signaled to my driver. But Audrey, my mother cried out, her voice thin and desperate. Where do we go? What do we do? That sounds like a personal problem, I said over my shoulder. You are resourceful people. I am sure you will figure it out. After all, you have to be tough to survive in this world. Isn't that what you taught me? I slid into the back of the sedan and closed the door, shutting out their pleas. As the car pulled away, I watched them in the rearview mirror, 2 small figures standing alone in the vast concrete emptiness, realizing too late that they had thrown away the only thing that could have saved them. 3 days after the arrests, I was sitting in my new office at Atlas Ventures, reviewing the liquidation assets of BioHealth, when the intercom on my desk buzzed. My executive assistant spoke with a tone of polite hesitation. She told me that a woman claiming to be my sister was in the lobby and refusing to leave until she saw me. I sighed and told her to send her up. I knew this moment was inevitable. Brittany was not the type to suffer in silence. She was the type to scream until someone paid her to stop. When the glass doors opened, Brittany stormed in. The transformation was shocking. The girl who had spent hours contouring her face and selecting the perfect outfit was gone. In her place was a disheveled, frantic woman wearing a tracksuit that looked like it had been slept in. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and her eyes were red and swollen. She did not look sad. She looked furious. She marched up to my desk and slammed a small velvet pouch down on the surface. It hit the wood with a dull thud. "Do you know how much they offered me?" she screamed without a preamble. "Do you know how much I got for the engagement ring? The ring, Jamal said, was worth $50,000. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers. "I assume the pawnbroker told you it was cubic zirconia," I replied calmly. $20, she shrieked. "They gave me $20 for the metal setting." They laughed at me, Audrey. I went to 3 different pawn shops trying to sell it so I could pay the deposit on a studio apartment. They all laughed at me. I had to sell my Birkin bag. I had to sell my shoes. I am walking around in flip-flops because I sold my Louboutins to buy groceries. I looked at her feet. She was indeed wearing cheap rubber flip-flops. It was a stark fall from grace for the girl who used to mock my sneakers. "I am sorry you are going through that, Brittany," I said. "But I do not see how this is my problem." She stared at me, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. "How is it your problem? You are a billionaire. You are sitting here in this glass tower controlling everything while your own sister is selling her clothes to eat. How can you sleep at night?" She leaned over the desk, her eyes burning with entitlement. "I am not asking for a mansion. I just want my share." You have so much money that you would not even notice if you gave me $1 million. It is just a rounding error to you. But it would save my life. Give me the money, Audrey. You owe me. I stood up slowly. I owe you nothing, I said, my voice dropping to a chill. You spent the last 2 years treating me like a servant. You made me carry your bags. You made me pay for your dresses. You let your fiancé humiliate me in public and you laughed. You did not come here to apologize. You did not come here to ask how I am doing. You came here because you still think you are entitled to the fruit of my labor. Brittany slammed her hand on the desk. Because we are family, she yelled. That is what family does. They share. No, Brittany, I corrected. Family supports each other. You were a parasite, and the host has finally cut you off. I pressed the button on my intercom. Security, please escort Ms. Washington out of the building, and please ensure she is placed on the permanent do not admit list. Brittany gasped. You are kicking me out. You are actually kicking me out. 2 large guards in dark suits entered the office. They did not hesitate. They took Brittany by the arms, lifting her away from my desk. You are a monster, she screamed as they dragged her backward. You are a selfish, cold-hearted witch. I hope you die alone in this office. I hate you. I watched her kicking and screaming as she was hauled out of the room. Her voice echoed down the hallway, a fading siren of entitlement. I sat back down and picked up my pen. I did not feel like a monster. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I looked at the schedule for the day and went back to work. The federal courthouse was a place designed to strip away vanity. There were no mood lights or mahogany conference tables here, only harsh fluorescent tubes that hummed with a headache-inducing frequency, and benches made of unyielding oak. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I was not there as a sister. I was there as the primary witness for the prosecution. When the bailiff announced the arrival of the defendant, I watched the side door. Jamal shuffled in. The contrast was physically jarring. Gone were the tailored suits, the silk ties, and the Swiss watches. He was wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. His head was shaved, and his wrists and ankles were bound by heavy chains that clanked with every small step he took. He looked smaller. The grandiosity that had fueled him for 30 years had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified man who looked much younger than his age. I took the stand when my name was called. The prosecutor asked me simple, direct questions. Did I authorize the transfer of funds? No. Did I approve the purchase of the Ferrari? No. Did Jamal Washington have permission to leverage the family home? No. I answered without emotion. I did not look at Jamal while I spoke. I kept my eyes on the jury, a collection of 12 strangers who looked at my brother not with admiration, but with the bored disdain reserved for common thieves. My testimony was the final nail in the coffin. I was the ghost he had tried to rob, and I was the reality check he could not bounce. The sentencing phase was brief. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, had no patience for white-collar crime. She looked at Jamal over the rim of her spectacles and delivered a lecture that silenced the few supporters he had left in the room. Mr. Washington, she said, her voice booming without a microphone, you preyed on the trust of your family and the greed of the public. You built a monument to your own ego using stolen bricks. You have shown no remorse, only regret that you were caught. Jamal stood up, his chains rattling loudly in the quiet room. He lowered his head, waiting for the blow. I hereby sentence you to 10 years in a federal correctional facility, the judge declared. You will also be required to pay restitution in the amount of $5 million. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. 10 years. He would be 40 years old when he saw the outside world again. His youth, his potential, and his freedom were gone. As the marshals moved in to take him away, Jamal stopped. He dug his heels into the carpet, resisting just for a second. He turned his head slowly, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. The look he gave me was complex. It was not the pure rage he had shown in the boardroom. It was something deeper and more painful. There was hatred there, certainly. He hated me for exposing him. He hated me for being the one person he couldn't charm. But beneath the hate, there was a profound regret. He looked at me and realized that he had spent his whole life underestimating the only person who could have actually helped him. He realized that if he had just been kind, if he had just treated me with basic human decency, I might have saved him. I held his gaze. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply watched him. Move it. Washington, the marshal barked, shoving him forward. Jamal stumbled and the connection was broken. He was dragged through the side door, the heavy metal clanking fading into the corridor. The courtroom began to empty out around me. I sat there for a moment longer, listening to the silence. The golden child was gone. The ghost had won. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the courthouse ready to start my life for the first time without the weight of their expectations on my shoulders. The neon sign outside the motel window flickered with a maddening buzz, casting a rhythmic red glow over the stained carpet. My parents stood in the center of the cramped room, surrounded by the few plastic garbage bags that now contained their entire lives. They had been forced to move to a dilapidated boarding house on the outskirts of Tacoma, a place where the sirens wailed all night and the air smelled permanently of stale smoke and damp rot. Susan sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, pulling her coat tighter around herself, refusing to touch the questionable bedspread. "This cannot be happening," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and denial. "We are the Washingtons. We do not live in a place like this. This is where people go when they have failed Richard." My father kicked a plastic bag out of his way, his face twisted in a scowl. "It is temporary, Susan," he snapped, pacing the 3 feet of available floor space. "Do not lose your head. We just need to make a few calls. Once the family hears what that ungrateful witch did to us, they will come running. They will be outraged. We will be staying in a guest room by tonight." He pulled out his phone, the screen cracked from the chaos of the eviction. He dialed his sister Linda first. He put the phone to his ear, puffing out his chest, trying to summon the authority he no longer possessed. "Linda," he boomed, using his best boardroom voice. "It is Richard. Listen, we have a slight situation. Audrey has gone completely rogue. She has stolen our assets and thrown your own brother out on the street. We need the guest cottage for a few weeks while I sort out the legal." He stopped. His face went slack. He listened for a moment, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What do you mean you saw the article?" he stammered. "That is a lie. That is all fake news, Linda. Audrey paid the reporters to smear us. We are victims here." "Linda. Linda, do not hang up on me." He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen as the call ended. "She hung up on me," he whispered. "She said she does not want to be associated with criminals." "Give it to me," Susan hissed, snatching the phone from his hand. "Men are useless at this." She dialed her cousin Martha, a woman she had bragged to for years about Jamal's success. "Martha, darling," she chirped, forcing a bright, desperate tone into her voice. "It is Susan. I am sure you have heard some terrible rumors. People are so jealous of success, aren't they? Look, Richard and I are between properties right now, and we were wondering if Susan stopped speaking." Her face turned a patchy red. She gripped the phone so tight her knuckles turned white. "How dare you?" she screeched. "We are not fraudsters. We are upstanding citizens. You should be honored to host us." She threw the phone onto the bed. Martha read the court transcripts, she said, her voice hollow. She said the Seattle Times published the emails where we discussed hiding the money. She said the whole town knows we helped Jamal set up the shell companies. She called us accomplices, Richard. They sat there in the silence of the dirty room, the red neon light washing over them like a warning sign. The phone lay between them, silent and accusing. They realized then that the isolation was total. They had spent decades judging others for their poverty, and now they were destitute. They had spent a lifetime seeking the approval of their peers, and now they were pariahs. They had sacrificed their only loyal daughter for a lie, and now the lie had evaporated, leaving them alone in the cold. There was no one left to call. The world had turned its back, and they had no one to blame but themselves. The engine of my car cut out, leaving a heavy silence that settled over the driveway of the colonial house on Elm Street. It had been less than a week since the moving trucks had stripped this place bare, hauling away the physical evidence of my parents' lives. The for sale sign was still stuck in the lawn, but a red sold strip had been slapped across it. My parents believed a faceless investment firm had purchased their distressed asset. They did not know that the signature on the deed belonged to me. I walked up the concrete path, the same path I had walked down hundreds of times, usually with my head down, trying to avoid criticism. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key. It was a new key. I had the locks changed the hour the title transfer was recorded. I did not want any surprise visits from former tenants who might still believe they had a right to this space. I pushed the front door open. The air inside was stale and still. The house was completely empty. The beige sofa where my mother used to hold court was gone. The dining table where my father had slapped me was gone. The Mont Blanc pen, the fake charts, the pretension, it had all been vacuumed out, leaving only the bare bones of the structure. I walked into the living room. The afternoon light filtered through the dust motes, dancing in the air. Without the furniture, the room looked larger but also friendlier. For 20 years, this house had been a prison of expectations and judgment. But now, standing in the center of the hollow room, I did not feel the ghosts of my parents. I felt something else. I felt the memory of the woman who had owned this house before them. I walked to the kitchen, running my hand along the counter. This was where my grandmother had taught me how to make bread. This was where she had whispered to me that I was smart and that I was going to be someone someday. My parents had inherited this house when she passed, and they had immediately tried to erase her presence, replacing her warmth with cold, modern decor and anxiety. They had turned a home into a showpiece. I stopped at the bay window, looking out at the overgrown garden. I knew what the neighbors would expect. If they knew I had bought the house, they would assume it was an act of charity. They would expect to see Richard and Susan moving their boxes back in, rescued by their benevolent daughter. They would think this was a story of forgiveness. They would be wrong. I had not bought this house to save my parents. I had bought it to save the memory of my grandmother. I was going to renovate it. I was going to strip the wallpaper my mother had chosen. I was going to sand down the floors my father had paced on. I was going to exorcise every trace of their greed and entitlement until the house felt like it belonged to Grandma again. My parents were currently sitting in a motel room wondering where they went wrong. They would never step foot in this house again. This door was closed to them forever. I turned away from the window and looked at the empty space. It was a blank canvas. It was quiet. It was peaceful. And for the first time since I was a child, it finally felt like home. The launch of the Athena initiative was not held in a cold glass atrium filled with hired actors. It was held in a community center in the district where I grew up. The room was packed not with sharks looking for a quick payout, but with women who had ideas that terrified the traditional banking system. I stood on the small stage looking out at faces that mirrored my own from 2 years ago, tired, determined, and desperate for just one person to believe in them. I signed the charter document with a simple ballpoint pen. There were no false promises of billions. There was only a commitment of seed capital to female entrepreneurs who had been rejected by the old guard. I was not just giving them money. I was giving them the shield of the Ghost Capital name. I was turning the weapon that had destroyed Jamal into a tool for construction. The media ate it up. They loved the narrative of the reclusive heiress stepping out of the shadows to rewrite the rules of venture capital. The interview requests poured in, but I only accepted one. 2 weeks later, I was walking past a newsstand on 4th Avenue. The vendor was stacking the new issues of Forbes. I stopped to look. There I was. The photographer had caught me in a moment of candid laughter wearing a simple white blazer. I looked light. I looked unburdened. The headline emblazoned across my chest read, "The Quiet Revolution: How Audrey Washington is Betting on the Underdog." Miles away in a part of the city where the streetlights flickered and the sidewalks were cracked, my parents were walking to the bus stop. Their luxury SUV had been repossessed the day after they were evicted. Now they navigated the world with a handful of coins and a profound sense of victimization. Richard stopped at a metal kiosk to check the time on his cracked phone screen. He looked tired. His skin was gray, and his posture, which used to be aggressively upright, was now slumped in permanent defeat. Susan trailed behind him, clutching her purse, as if it contained diamonds instead of food stamps. Richard's eyes drifted over the rack of magazines. He froze. Susan bumped into his back. "Keep moving, Richard," she snapped. "It is going to rain, and I do not want to wait 20 minutes for the next bus." He did not move. He lifted a trembling hand and pointed at the rack. "Look," he whispered. Susan squinted through her reading glasses. She followed his finger to the glossy cover of Forbes. She saw the face she had scrubbed 1,000 times, the smile she had called goofy, the daughter she had called a failure. She gasped. The sound was sharp and painful, like a rib cracking. "She is on the cover," Richard said, his voice hollow. "Not the business section. The cover." Susan leaned closer, reading the subtext under the headline. Estimated net worth $3 billion. The number hit them like a physical blow. $3 billion. They had sold their home for a fraction of a percent of that. They had destroyed their family for a rounding error. They stood there on the dirty pavement staring at the image of the daughter, who was now one of the most powerful women in the world. A teenager waiting for the bus noticed them staring. "That is a cool cover, right?" he said, popping his gum. "I heard she used to have a family that treated her like trash. Now she owns the whole city. Crazy, right?" My parents did not answer. They could not answer. They simply turned away, pulling their coats tighter against the cold wind, and walked toward the bus stop, leaving the image of my success behind them glowing under the streetlights. They finally understood the magnitude of what they had thrown away. And for the first time, they had no words to justify it. I decided to treat myself to dinner at a small French bistro in Pioneer Square. It was not the kind of place Jamal would have frequented. There were no velvet ropes or paparazzi waiting outside, just the smell of roasted garlic and the sound of quiet conversation. I sat at a corner table enjoying the novelty of reading a book while waiting for my meal without anyone criticizing my lack of social climbing. A shadow fell across my table. "Sparkling or still, miss?" a voice asked. The voice was familiar, but it lacked the sharp edge of entitlement I was used to. It was thin, brittle, and tired. I lowered my book and looked up. Brittany was standing there holding a glass carafe. She was wearing the standard uniform of black slacks and a white shirt, but the shirt was wrinkled and the apron was tied clumsily around her waist. Her hair, usually a meticulously highlighted mane of extensions, was pulled back into a severe ponytail that highlighted the exhaustion in her face. She was not wearing makeup. For the first time, I saw the dark circles under her eyes and the fine lines of stress around her mouth. She froze when she saw me. Her eyes widened and her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. She was waiting for me to laugh. She was waiting for me to pull out my phone and take a picture to send to the tabloids. She was waiting for the humiliation she had dished out to me for years to be returned tenfold. Her hands began to shake. The tremor started in her fingers and traveled up her arm until the heavy glass carafe rattled in her grip. She tried to steady it, but her nerves were shot. The carafe slipped. It hit the edge of my water glass with a loud clink. Ice water cascaded across the table, soaking the white linen tablecloth and splashing onto my book. Brittany gasped, dropping the carafe entirely. It bounced on the carpeted floor, thankfully not breaking, but the damage was done. She scrambled backward, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I am so sorry. I will clean it up. Please do not tell the manager. He is on probation. Please, Audrey. I need this job." She grabbed a handful of napkins and began frantically dabbing at the spill, her movements jerky and panicked. I watched her, realizing that this was not the sister who had demanded I pay for her wedding dress. This was a stranger. This was a woman who had learned the hard way that the world does not care about your last name when your bank account is empty. I reached out and placed my hand gently over hers, stopping her frantic scrubbing. "Brittany," I said softly. She flinched, pulling her hand away as if I had burned her. She looked at me with tears welling in her eyes, bracing herself for the lecture. She expected me to tell her she was useless. She expected me to ask why she couldn't do even a simple job correctly. I stood up and picked up my purse. I looked at the wet tablecloth and then at my sister who was trembling in a waitress uniform. I felt no anger. I felt no satisfaction. I felt absolutely nothing. The cord that had connected us for 30 years, the cord woven from obligation and abuse, had finally dissolved. Be careful, I said. It was not a warning. It was not a threat. It was a simple instruction for a life she now had to navigate alone. I pulled $100 bill from my wallet. It was more than the cost of the meal I hadn't eaten. I placed it on the wet table right next to the puddle of water. Keep the change, I said. I turned and walked toward the exit. I did not look back. I knew she was watching me. I knew she was standing there with the damp napkins in her hand, realizing that the tip I had left her was the last thing she would ever receive from me. There were no goodbye hugs. There were no promises to catch up. There was only the silence of two people who had become strangers, and the quiet click of my heels as I walked out of her life forever. The air at 4,500 feet is thinner. It tastes different. It tastes like ozone and cold mist and absolute silence. I stood on the balcony of the penthouse that actually belonged to me, leaning against the glass railing that separated me from the rest of the world. Below me, the city of Seattle was a grid of glowing amber and white lights, a living circuit board that I had learned to master while everyone else was sleeping. I took a sip of wine. It was a vintage that cost more than the car I used to drive to family dinners. I swirled the dark liquid in the glass, watching the city reflect in it. For 2 years, they called me unemployed. They whispered it at parties. They shouted it at the dinner table. They used it as a weapon to bludgeon my self-esteem to keep me small so they could feel big. They looked at my hoodies and my messy hair and saw a failure. They saw a woman wasting her life on the couch. They were wrong. I was not unemployed. I was underground. While they were busy leasing cars, they could not afford to impress people they did not like. I was building an empire in the dark. I was reading balance sheets. I was studying market trends. I was learning the language of the enemy so that when the time came, I could speak it better than they did. They thought I was doing nothing. In reality, I was sharpening the blade that would eventually cut the cord. I looked down at the streets far below. Somewhere down there in the maze of concrete and rain, my parents were sitting in a cramped room, wondering where the money went. Somewhere down there, my sister was icing her swollen feet after a double shift, trying to understand a world that did not care about her beauty. A younger version of me might have felt a twinge of guilt. A younger version of me might have wanted to go down there and save them to buy their love one last time. But that girl died the night my father slapped me. She died the moment my sister demanded my life savings for a dress. I realized then that the greatest revenge is not cruelty. It is not screaming. It is not sending them to prison or dragging their names through the mud. That is too messy. That requires too much emotion. The greatest revenge is simply outgrowing them. It is ascending to a level of existence where their problems, their dramas, and their petty judgments can no longer reach you. It is building a life so complete, so fortified, and so magnificent that they become nothing more than a footnote in your biography. I set the wine glass down on the railing. The wind whipped my hair across my face, but I did not shiver. I felt warm. I felt solid. They called me a failure. I call myself free. I turned my back on the city lights and walked back into the warmth of my home. The glass doors slid shut behind me, sealing out the noise, sealing out the past, and sealing out the people who had once defined me. They could look up at the tower. They could see the light in the window, but they could never ever touch me again. The most profound lesson from Audrey's journey is the danger of confusing noise with signal. Her family was intoxicated by the performance of success, the designer clothes, the leased cars, and the loud proclamations of wealth. They worshipped an illusion because it validated their own vanity. In contrast, Audrey represents the unshakable power of silent execution. She proves that true capability doesn't need to scream to be heard, it simply needs to be ready. While Jamal was busy curating an image, Audrey was building an empire. This teaches us that being underestimated is actually a superpower. When people count you out, they stop watching you, giving you the freedom to maneuver without interference. The story also delivers a harsh but necessary truth about boundaries. We are often conditioned to believe that family loyalty is unconditional, even when it is abusive. However, Audrey demonstrates that access to your energy, your resources, and your peace is a privilege, not a birthright. You cannot save people who are determined to destroy themselves to maintain a facade. The revenge Audrey took wasn't malicious. It was simply the act of removing her safety net from people who used it to strangle her. True success isn't about the applause you receive at the dinner table. It is about the security you build when no one is watching. It is better to be a failure who owns the building than a success who gets evicted from it. Stop trying to prove your worth to people who only value your utility. Build your empire in the dark and let your results introduce you.